through Iranian eyes. If you're an Iranian, you think we are a great people. We had one of the greatest empires that ruled much of the world for centuries. We can be a great people again. We want to be a great power. How do we become a great power? Well, the one way we can become a great power overnight is by acquiring nuclear weapons. Why would they give that up? Why would some sanctions make them give that up? Would you? I mean, think if we applied the exact same sanctions to Israel. Do you think the Israelis would give up their nuclear weapons? I mean, the Iranians, this was one of the better articles you may have seen in the New York Times a week or two ago, I think, did look a little bit at the way the Iranians think. And they say, look, why shouldn't we have nuclear weapons? Israel has them, India has them, Pakistan has them. What gives them the right to have nuclear weapons and not us? And so I think it's a perfectly valid argument. And they believe once they have nuclear weapons, if they ride out this sanctions storm, once they have nuclear weapons, and again, the New York Times said that this is the view in one of the Western capitals, the problem's going to go away. Just like now we accept India and Pakistan with nuclear weapons. Pakistan's our big ally. We do trade with India, even though they have nuclear weapons. We didn't want them to have them originally, but we came to accept it. The Iranians believe the world will accept it once they have them, and they'll forget about it. And I think there's good justification for believing it. Absolutely, the Europeans will forget about it.
Yeah, so I think Israel cannot live with Iran having a nuclear weapon. My question for you is, what's keeping Netanyahu from pulling the trigger?
Well, this is the most important issue of the day, not just for Israel, but for the entire world. And the question is, what do you do? It's an impossible decision. I believe it's an impossible decision for President Obama or for Prime Minister Netanyahu, because pulling the trigger. What does pulling the trigger mean? Well, we don't know necessarily where all the weapons are. We don't necessarily know if we can take them all out. We don't know if we can take them out permanently or only for a short time. We don't know what the consequences are going to be. Is Hezbollah going to launch 50,000 rockets at Israel at the same time, and Hamas launching its 20,000? Is the Strait of Hormuz going to be blocked in some way or mined? Is the price of oil going to skyrocket and sink the entire world's economy? Is terrorism going to be launched at American targets all over the world? There are lots of consequences which we can predict and lots we can't. Is it worth the risk? All of those potential catastrophic consequences to stop Iran with a military option. On the other hand, do you, if you're the Prime Minister of Israel, want to be the guy who waited too long? Can you afford to wait until it's too long? And when is too late? Is it now too late? Is it too late a year from now, 2 years from now? Right now, if it happens, undoubtedly, something the world economy is going to suffer. It's going to sink Obama. Is that a reason for Obama not to attack? It's at least one reason why he might not. And you might have noticed Panetta just said that they think the Iranians won't reach the point of no return until a year from now. Interesting date. But what's the consequences for the United States if we were to attack? Do we want to again be seen as attacking a Muslim country? If we attack Iran, there's a lot of people who believe that we should have supported the opposition to the mullahs. Well, what happens if we attack Iran? Suddenly the opposition may disappear and the whole country unites because now they're under attack. Is that a good consequence for us, or a more harmful one? I think it's an impossible decision, and I think that's why nobody's pulled the trigger. And I think Netanyahu, there's lots of things written that Netanyahu and Barak want to do it, but they know that there are going to be terrible consequences, and they have to decide at some point: are the benefits of stopping them, if only for a short time, worth the cost? And they, I think, would like the United States or some other powers to do this for them. And I don't think there's a lot of confidence that that's going to happen, certainly not in the next year, and that may not be soon enough. But, again, the idea that sanctions are going to work just seems to me not taking into account what Iranians think, that unless you make the sanctions just so onerous on the people, I just don't see how they could possibly ever influence the Iranians to change their way. And so far, the evidence is clear. We've had sanctions now for how many years? 6 years? And the Iranians are closer and closer. Yeah.
How likely do you think it is that the current Saudi government will remain as it is versus change, be overthrown in the next...
How stable is the Saudi government?
Right.
Well, they're clearly worried. You may have read that there are uprisings in the Shiite areas, which is another reason why they're so worried about Iran, because they blame Iran for stirring up the Shiites, who happen to be in one of the areas where a lot of the oil is. But the Saudi government is pretty stable, because the Saudis basically have learned how to survive. They're very good. Don't take the things I've said about the Saudis the wrong way. I believe they're very smart. They've learned to survive. And the two main ways that they survive within Saudi Arabia are the old-fashioned way. First, they marry everybody. And secondly, they buy off everybody. So you've got thousands of princes, because the Saudis all marry all the rival tribes. And all of those princes get cuts of every commercial deal that's made between the United States or any country in Saudi Arabia. They all get kickbacks. And so why would they want to kill the golden goose? And you may have read or may remember that after Tahrir, when there was rumblings in Saudi Arabia, people were worried about it, they suddenly announced billions of dollars of aid programs and free this and free that. So, they're handing out money to buy off the opposition. So, for the moment, they seem fairly stable. And, again, to go back to the Arabists in the State Department and why the United States doesn't stand up to the Saudis, and Dennis Ross told me this, I quote him in my book, that the basic belief is that what would come after could be worse. And my argument is, how could it be worse? If it's somebody else, they still have to sell us the oil, and they can't be any worse than the Saudis in supporting terrorism against us, so I don't believe it would be worse, but that's the general belief in the State Department and the government. Yeah. Go ahead.
No, well, back to the Iranian question. Forgetting the political implications for a moment, what do you think the odds of a significant military success would be in bombing their nuclear progress?
What would be the chances of success? I have no idea.
I mean, that's an important question, I would think.
Well, I'm not the one who's making the decision. I don't have the information.
Okay.
If I had the information, we'd all be in trouble. Because there's, one of the things, about this whole Iranian issue, the fact that so much of it is in the press, you got to think or hope this isn't what's really going on. Because if it is, then I think we're all in trouble. But I have a certain degree of confidence that what is known isn't being told to us, and the plans that are being made certainly aren't being told to us. And people tell me that it can be done.
Yeah.
What that means, I don't know. But I think certainly the capabilities are there to at least slow things down, if not stop them. Yeah.
Going back to post 9/11, you mentioned Prince Bandar, who was the Saudi representative to the United States. He had a fairly high profile. I'd be interested to know why you think he was so summarily recalled. And just as a sidelight, an odd sidelight, the Swiss Air flight out of Boston bound for Halifax that went into the sea along the south shore of Nova Scotia. His son was aboard. He was one of the people who perished. And I was wondering what has happened to Prince Bandar and why you think he was no longer here.
He's still around, and he's still influential. The question was why Prince Bandar was recalled and what's become of him. He was the ambassador for about 22 years, and then he was recalled because there was some upheaval within the Saudi royal family, and changes were made. His patrons sort of lost favor temporarily, but he's still an influential character. But he'd been here a long time, and they also were interested in the change. They brought in somebody who also was very good. He's still here, the guy who the Iranians allegedly tried to kill, Abu Jubair. He speaks perfect English. He comes across as this great moderate, and presents the Saudi case very well. But, one of the things about Bandar also, to go back to another part of the story of how the Saudis operate, one of the little-known stories is that the Bandar was accused of bribing British aerospace industries to buy British airplanes instead of American planes. He supposedly got $2 billion, and the British government was investigating. And then the Saudis sent a message to the Blair government that said basically, you might want to stop this investigation, otherwise bombs might start going off in the subways again. And guess what? They dropped the investigation. And you know what? What Bandar allegedly did is illegal in the United States. And that the United States had briefly a investigation, and then there was a settlement before there was any detailed investigation. Because one of the things that goes on is there's a lot of bribery and kickbacks, and the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act was actually created because of finding out about the kickbacks that the Saudis were getting.
We have time for a couple more questions. Anyone, Fran hasn't had a question yet. I think Michael hasn't had a question.
Okay.
So, you said something that I thought was really interesting. You said,
Was really what?
interesting.
Oh, good. Stop there.
Only one.
But the most interesting
Yes.
was that you thought that there were things afoot that we don't know about that would prevent or stop the issue from Iran from getting larger or worse or happening. So I was wondering if you'd share some of that with us. That, to me, is really worth hearing.
You think I know secrets, and if I knew them, I would tell you?
I think
Well, I mean, all you have to do is think about the assassination of Iranian nuclear scientists are meeting untimely ends. Doesn't seem coincidental to me. You've all read about the Stuxnet virus. Those are two things that have become public. So I imagine there are lots of other things going on that we don't know about. Whether they're sufficient to stop the Iranians is a different story. But I think there's a view that some of these things certainly slowed them down, because if you look back, pretty much every year the Israeli head of military intelligence said the Iranians are about to have a nuclear weapon. Almost every year they would say within 3 to 5 years the Iranians will have a nuclear weapon. And they say this every year. And so it keeps moving farther and farther out. And so the only reason that could be happening is some of these things are having an impact. And we know about some of them. We know about the centrifuges that have blown up. There was the story that just came out a couple of weeks ago about the missile factory that blew up in mysterious circumstances in Iran. So, there's no question. It's not a secret that clandestine activities are going on to stop the Iranians in a variety of different ways. But the fact that they continue to get closer and closer, I think, shows that they're not sufficient. And that's why you're hearing more talk about it.
Secretary said last week ago Sunday that the Israelis thought that they would have to take action by April, May, or June, or it would be too late.
I don't know about dates. One of the reasons for dates has to do with things like the weather. Maybe don't think much about it, but the weather is crucial for when you can launch certain kinds of operations. And so they can't attack at certain times of the year. It's just like when we were going into the Iraq War. We had to think about weather before we went into Iraq in 1992. So there are a lot of things that are going to go into the calculations. But look, the Israelis don't want to have to do this. The consequences are just too grave, but at some point, they're going to have to say, look, they've been saying over and over again, it's an existential threat, they can't live with the nuclear Iran, so at some point they have to act on that belief. And hopefully they won't have to, and hopefully someone else will take care of the problem. Or there'll be some other way to take care of it. But I don't think there is a way other than military, unfortunately. I don't think so.
Michael had a question, and I think Sid had his hand up for a while, so I think we'll make those the last two questions.
You're the boss. Yeah.
You mentioned earlier about lessening our dependence upon Mideast oil would reduce the influence of the Saudis and others, of course. And that seems to be a stated goal of the Obama administration. But looking at some of the things that they've done, the kinds of failures, colossal failures in investing in alternative resources. And they've driven drilling, for example, out of the Gulf of Mexico, and they don't want to build a pipeline to bring the tar sands oil into the United States. Seems to actually be quite contrary to our interests of reducing our dependence on Mideast oil. I just wondered if you could comment on that.
I don't do domestic policy. I don't think the solution is necessarily drilling for more oil. We have to get off oil. We have to find other ways of, it's mostly a transportation issue. Most of the oil is used in transportation, so we need to find ways to transport ourselves without using oil or without using significantly less. So you have this brilliant idea, which we'll see if it works in Israel, of a better place with the exchangeable batteries, which I think is going to start going nationwide fairly shortly, and we'll see how well that kind of solution works. It may never work in a country as big as the United States, but we have to get off oil, I think, is the answer. That just trying to get more oil doesn't solve the problem. It minimizes it marginally. And it's not just us, remember, who uses the oil. The fact that other countries are so highly dependent on it also affects the overall global strategy. Why are we having such a problem getting sanctions against Iran? Because countries like Japan and China need Iranian oil and don't want to give it up.
Sid, you have the last question.
Yeah, one is I actually have two questions, but one is really short. I read recently that the Obama administration gave Israel a bunker-busting bonds.
Yes.
That they would need to...
Bush wouldn't do it, Obama did.
Okay. And then the other question really was, is there some sort of split? I mean, you were implying that the Saudi policy is sort of against peace all the time. And I mean, is there a split in the Saudi thinking about that? I mean, they like to let people know that the present king has a much more moderate policy than most of his compatriots, let's put it that way. Or is that just...
The question is there a split in the Saudi government about whether it be for peace?
The question of...
Look, the Saudis basically are interested in one thing and one thing only, keeping their heads on their shoulders. And part of that is trying to at least give the impression that they are moderates and that we should support them, that they're not radicals. So it shouldn't be seen as a coincidence that the Saudi peace plan came right after 9/11. I argue it's a complete public relations ploy, purely to try to change the discussion from the Saudis are the principal sponsors in the world of terror to, oh, look, the Saudis are promoting peace. They want to create a comprehensive peace in the Middle East. There was a precedent. They did this in 1981. I don't know how many of you remember that King Fahd had a peace plan also. This, coincidentally, was during a debate over whether the United States should sell AWACS planes to Saudi Arabia. And those of you who remember, No, it was an extremely controversial sale in which the majority of Congress was actually opposed to it, and it was about to be defeated. And one of the things that the Reagan administration used as an argument for selling the weapons to the Saudis was, look, they're supporters of peace. Look, here's the king's peace plan. And guess what? Immediately after the AWACS sale went through, King Fahd said that they need to liberate Jerusalem from the Zionists. So I don't think there is any debate in Saudi Arabia. The Saudis are the most anti-Semitic people on earth. Outright anti-Semitic. There's great stories about the prior king, Faisal, I think, who used to keep the protocols of the elders of Zion outside his office and give it to all his visitors. And he would it was a great story about how he lectured Henry Kissinger on the Bolshevists and their connection to the Zionists and the evils of Zionism. So these guys are rabid anti-Semites. You know, it wasn't too long ago, I don't know if any of you saw this, they had on their website, basically for tourists, no Jews allowed. And the king used to talk about, not this king, again, Faisal, I think it was Faisal who said, one of his fond memories of his visit to the United States was when he went to San Francisco and he saw signs in the windows that said no Jews or dogs allowed. So the idea that the Saudis are interested in peace, I find just completely at odds with all of their activities. Thank you all very much. 5 books.